With travel surging back, Changi Airport is looking to hire more than 6,600 workers in a big recruitment drive. Just in time for the school holidays, a new cruise brand will make its debut in Singapore with a luxury ship. And in a historic move, Finland and Sweden apply for membership in the NATO Defence Alliance. Good evening, you're watching The Big Story with me, Hairianto Diman. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you will not miss a single episode. Gearing up for an expected surge in travellers, Changi Airport Group is looking to hire over 6,600 workers through a huge recruitment drive. People will be hired on the spot at the One Aviation Careers Fair at the Suntec City Convention Centre next Friday and Saturday. Now that's where more than 20 aviation companies will be conducted on-site interviews. Jobs on offer include frontline passenger service positions, ground handlers, airport emergency service and cyber security officers. With air travel picking up fast, our news editor Karimjit Kaur sat down with Willie Walsh, head of the International Air Transport Association, to discuss the latest trends. Have a look.
Now, after more than 2 years of COVID, we're now looking at recovery in the aviation sector. The demand for travel is really high, including here in Singapore as well. Now, you yourself have said that you expect traffic to return to pre-pandemic levels in 2023, and that is a year ahead of what had been earlier forecast. Now, where is this confidence coming from?
Well, I have to say the recovery is much stronger than even I had expected, and I'm an optimist. You know, looking at the industry, I felt we would recover once the restrictions on border crossings were relaxed or removed. But the pace at which the industry is recovering is very, very encouraging. When we've analysed all of the various markets, you know, what we see is international travel recovering stronger than expected. The domestic markets are not as strong as we had originally expected, but that's principally down to China. And China is a very big domestic market. So with the Chinese government continuing to pursue zero COVID, it's having a big impact there.
So pre-pandemic, you know, this region was flying high, you know, it was being looked at as the biggest air travel market. Do you think, Asia can recover, and can it close the gap, and how long do you reckon that will take?
Clearly, I would like to see a move in China. I don't think we're going to see that this year, but quite honestly, I'm not concerned because it's not really going to impact on the recovery in 22, because I think carriers in the region have lots of opportunity to rebuild their networks in other areas. But going into 2023, if China is still closed, well then I think it will have an impact in 2023.
So given that China is such a huge market in Asia, you don't think that the region as a whole can recover quickly without China, or do you think it can?
No, I think China is just too big a part of the market here. So if the borders remain closed there, it certainly will slow down the recovery. But I still think there's a lot of positives. You know, there's a lot of ground to make up. With the region only at 13% in the first quarter of this year. And it is accelerating significantly from everything we've heard.
Apart from China, the other country that had been a bit slow, perhaps before this, was Japan.
Yeah.
But, they've made some announcements. How do you view that?
Yeah, I think Japan is now beginning to go in the right direction. I think the government there could be more ambitious, could take bolder decisions. I've always been really impressed with the success of the Japanese government in improving and focusing on tourism. You know, they've done a great job portraying and successfully developing Japan as a tourist destination. They're now beginning to slowly change and reopen, and I think that's a positive development. I would see Japan being about 9 months behind where Singapore is. So I hope it doesn't take 9 months to catch up, but if I look at where Singapore was 9 months ago, that's where I see Japan today.
So do you think Singapore has made a good recovery? If you look at Changi Airport and if you look at Singapore Airlines, Do you think they've made good progress and good recovery?
I think they have. What has always impressed me about Singapore, right throughout this 2-year period, has been, they were always expressing a desire to reopen. When other countries were sort of making a feature of the fact that they were locked down, Singapore was always looking for the opportunity to reopen and tried and tested a number of options. So, the ambition here was always, how quickly can we get back to pre-pandemic levels? And I think the recovery will be very strong here, certainly from the figures I've seen at Changi Airport. I'm very encouraged. So I think Singapore has done a good job. I think the government here is helping now. The fact that we're holding this conference at this time, I think, is an indication of the support that the government has for getting Changi back on the map as a global hub airport. And Singapore Airlines, I think, have done a fantastic job.
I think the big announcement for us yesterday probably was when Minister Ishwaran said that works were going to be restarted on Terminal 5, which is a huge expansion for Singapore and for the air hub.
I think Singapore was always looking to the future and spoke positively. That set them apart from a lot of other countries. And it was very helpful for us to be able to point to Singapore as an example of what other countries could do. So the speed of response in the region from Singapore has been very positive.
So while the recovery is good news overall for airlines and for airports and for travelers, the virus is still very much still here. And we're now talking about new subvariants of Omicron. Are you concerned that if this becomes worse, that it may derail some of the plans that the sector has for recovery?
No, I don't think so. I think we've learned a lot as we've gone through the 2 years. What is important is that we believe decisions should be based on scientific evidence and data, and there is a lot of data. I can understand and I can sympathize with governments imposing the restrictions that they did in early 2020 when this virus first appeared, because we were dealing with an unknown risk. It's very different now. So I'm optimistic that governments will have learned from what was done well and what was done badly over the past 2 years. But we have a lot of rich data now available to us, which should help governments to make more informed decisions and deal with the risks that are there as a result of the virus in a better way.
A look at other headlines. The new cruise brand Resorts World Cruises will debut in Singapore on June 15th with the cruise ship Genting Dream. Now, if you remember, the vessel used to be operated by Genting Hong Kong, which filed to wind up the company in January. As part of the new cruise launch, Resorts World Cruises is looking to rehire about 1,600 employees. Kensington Park condominium in Serangoon Garden has been launched for collective sale by public tender with a guide price of $1.28 billion. This is higher than the $1.05 billion that owners were aiming for in 2018. The Business Times reported at least 80% of owners signed the collective sale agreement last month. Singapore is set to have its largest district cooling system at an industrial development in Ang Mo Kio. SP Group and ST Microelectronics say the project at ST Micro's Technopark in Ang Mo Kio will be operational in 2025, with the semiconductor manufacturer investing $370 million over 20 years. Now, it has the potential to reduce carbon emissions of up to 120,000 tons per year. This is equivalent to taking about 109,000 cars off the road. Overall, it's expected to achieve 20% savings in electricity consumption annually. Journalist Ang Qing explains how these district cooling systems help to reduce emission.
District cooling refers to the centralization of cooling with central chiller plants. So how traditional cooling works is that there are actually, each building would have its own chiller plant. So district cooling is actually producing these cooling heats from a central chiller plant, and that allows it to optimize the level for how much cooling is needed for these various buildings. So in turn, that will lead to lower costs from the lower energy required, but because these chiller plants are not producing overcapacity, and therefore they produce based on how much is demanded from these various buildings. And then, that will lead to lower costs, lower carbon emissions, and energy savings as a whole.
Latest from the SEA Games in Hanoi, Tay Shui Hong wins Singapore's first shooting gold since 2017, and it's her first gold medal after finishing second in the event in 2015 and 2017. Another gold coming from Lucas Teo in the men's kayak single K1 1000 meter final. His medal comes 7 years after making history as Singapore's first canoeing gold medalist at the 2015 Games on home soil. And well done the fencing team for clinching their third consecutive title in the men's team foil and a historic silver in the women's team sabre today. It's their best ever showing at the SEA Games with 6 gold, 4 silver and 5 bronze medals. Elsewhere, Finland and Sweden have formally applied to join NATO as a deterrent against Russian aggression. It's a historic moment for the military alliance as the countries were both neutral throughout the Cold War. The accession process is expected to take only a few weeks, but ratification by all 30 member countries will take longer. The first war crimes trial since Russia's invasion of Ukraine gets underway in Kiev today. Appearing in the dock is a 21-year-old Russian soldier accused of killing a 62-year-old unarmed man on February 28th. He faces life in prison if convicted. The trial will be closely watched by observers to ensure its fairness. Netflix has slashed 150 jobs just weeks after announcing a shock loss in subscribers. The layoffs are mostly in the US and account for 2% of its total workforce. According to one source, there are likely to be more job cuts later this year as the streaming giant looks to trim more of its spending. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Haryanto Diman. See you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.